So back in the project, let's go to the tests integration folder and add a new file, returns.test.js. Now, just like before, we're going to start with a test suite. We call this /API/returns. Now, in this test suite, just like our other integration tests, we need to load the server and populate the database before each test and then do cleanup after. So to save time, I'm going to borrow some code from genres.test.js. So here I'm going to copy before each and after each functions. Copy, back here, paste them. So here we have this server variable. I want to define it here on the top. We could also define it in this block. It doesn't matter. So we load the server, and then after each, we close the server. Now we don't need to delete the genres. Instead, we need to delete the rental that we're going to create in the before each function. So on the top, we go 2 levels up, go to the models folder and load the rental module. And then use object restructuring syntax. So in before each, we're going to create a new rental. Let's create a rental object. We set this to a new rental like this. Now this rental should have 2 properties, the customer and the movie. Date out will be automatically set by Mongoose because we set a default value for that. So here we set customer. And if you remember, this customer that we have here should have 3 properties. Let's refresh your memory. So we go to rental model. Here's our rental schema. Look at the customer property. We have a subdocument with 3 properties: name, is gold, and phone. Now, is gold has a default value, so we just need to set the name and the phone. So back here, let's set the name 12345. The reason I'm setting this value is because here we expect this name to have at least 5 characters. So phone 12345 as well. We also need to set the ID because we're going to use it in our tests. So we set the ID. Now here we need an object ID. So on the top, we need to import Mongoose. Constant Mongoose requires Mongoose. Now back here, to set this, we call Mongoose the types.object ID. We call this method and get an object ID. Now, because we're going to use this object ID when posting a request, I'm going to store this in a separate variable. So let's cut this from here. Define a variable customer ID. Now here we set customer ID to a new object ID and also use the same value here. Later, when sending a request, we'll use this variable in the body of our request. Now we could also access it via rental.customer._ID, but that makes our tests a little bit noisy. That's why I decided to create a separate variable here. Now similarly, we need to initialize the movie property. So we set the movie. Again, here we need an ID. So let's define a new variable, movie ID, and initialize it just like the customer ID. So duplicate this line and set this to movie ID. And next, back here, we set _ID to movie ID. You also need to set title. We can set this to movie title or whatever. We need at least 5 characters. Let's double check that. So back to our rental model. Here's the movie property. Title should be at least 5 characters. So perhaps to take a consistent approach, we can set this to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's see what other properties we need here. So back to the rental model. We also need daily rental rate. So back here, let's set daily rental rate to $2. So this is our rental object. Now we need to save it to the database. So rental.save, and we await this promise. And finally, in after each, we want to clean up. So we call rental.remove. We pass an empty query object and await this promise. Now, before going any further, before writing any production code, let's just make sure what we have implemented here actually works. So here I'm going to add one simple test. It should work. And in this test, I simply look up this rental in the database. If it's there, that means our setup code is working. So let's call rental.find by ID. And we pass the ID of this rental that we created. The chances are we're going to use this rental object in our tests. So instead of defining it as a constant in this block, we should define it as a variable here so we can work with that and different functions. So let's delete this constant here. Now, back to our first test. So we want to look up a rental by this ID, rental._ID. We await this, get the result, and expect result not to be null. Let's see if this test passes. So save, back in the terminal. Okay, we got an error. Await is a reserved word, because here I used await, but I forgot to define our function as async. So here, when defining this before each function, we need to apply the async modifier. The same applies to our test function. This should also be async. Save, back in the terminal. All tests are passing, beautiful. So our setup code is ready. In the next lecture, we'll implement our first test case.